to your first breakout session of the day. It gives us a great pleasure to introduce Dr Dominique Thompson, Director of Buzz Consulting, who's going to talk to you today about navigating the tricky teenage years. Just to make you aware, this session will be recorded, but don't worry, none of your faces are going to be in the recording, but just let you know it is going on Teams for those that are able to join us physically today. It gives me great pleasure to hand over to yourself.
Thank you. I'm hoping everybody can hear me, so I'll just crack straight on. So let's see, does it work? Oh,
it was working.
It was working. Am I not pressing the right thing?
It should be, it might just go. The technical beforehand, did it work?
Joy of technology.
Take it out and put it in again.
Need a teenager. You do. Just whilst we're sorting out that bit, I'll tell you who I am, because that's the first slide. Shock. Right. So my name's Dominique Thompson. I was a GP for many years looking after students, thank you, at the University of Bristol. And I was the lead GP there for a long time. And oh, hello. It's gone again. And I was, there we go. And I was seeing them every 10 minutes, looking after them, dealing with anything and everything that they could bring in to see me. And one of the things that I noticed was that they were coming in with more mental health issues as the years went on. So over about 20 years, I saw a big change in that at the beginning, I might see 1 or 2 a day students out of 30 or 40 with a mental health or distress or stress problem. By the time I decided to take a step away from clinical practice and look at it in a different way, I was seeing 90% of my consultations were for that sort of problem. And so I started to think about, you know, what's going on and what we can do to help. And some of you may have heard me speak before. I've written a book with a colleague about how to grow a grown-up, which is all about raising teens in the 21st century. And I've done lots of stuff to try and support the mental health of students. One of my TEDx talks is called What I Learned from 78,000 Consultations with University Students. So what I thought I'd do today is to think about teenagers. We all come across them in our lives at some point. I have one that I like to keep at home, mostly. He's 14, but you will come across teenagers in all sorts of different roles. And I thought it might be helpful to have a little bit to think about teens. So I'm going to start with a question. And my question is, what is the point of teenagers? And it's a really important question. They are really important. And in fact, the stage of life of adolescence, the bit from about 11 or 12 all the way through to about 25, which is human adolescence, is actually one of the most important bits of life. In fact, it is mainly there so that they can learn to survive and thrive independently. Humans have the longest of all the adolescent periods of all the species, and lots of species have adolescence. If you had a lockdown puppy, you'll know that about 18 months to 2 years later, you were struggling with your teenage puppy. And they will go through that in about 9 months. We get nearer, well, you can work it out, but about 10 to 13 years of it. It's a joy. But it's really important to understand that it's there for a reason, and it is all about developing that independence as well as a few other things that are going on. So what I'm going to cover today is about the teen brain. We're going to think about teenagers. We're going to think about what's going on for them, why they might be struggling. I'm going to focus specifically a little bit around eating disorders and self-harm. So if those are difficult topics for you, it's fine to take a break, of course. And how do we support them? What do we do? And some resources. So thinking about that whole period of how they're going to develop their independence. Well, there are some interesting evolutionary things going on for teens. And remember, they don't know this and they don't have any control over it directly about how they feel. So we know that a young person has to go from being that little person who's always attached to their parent, wanting to be with them all the time, to actually needing to be able to live separately, independently, but not, you know, evolution or Mother Nature doesn't want it to be a sort of complete separation. You never sort of see them again. So what is the process that we think has evolved so that that can happen? And what we think happens is that teenagers simply become too embarrassed to be around their families. And that, we think, is the background, the evolutionary background to the embarrassment factor they have of those closest to them. And it's absolutely fascinating. They don't know that's happening, but they actually feel it as almost painful, some of those things that they see and hear. So dad dancing, they actually literally feel as in their pain centers in their brain, it lights up when they see stuff like that. But they can't control it. They can obviously learn to be aware of it and perhaps try and respond in an appropriate and measured manner. Yes, all teenagers, appropriate and measured, but it isn't something they have control over. It is an evolutionary drive. And so essentially it helps them to separate from their families. It's also perhaps why they're slightly embarrassed of most older adults, because they're trying to sort of develop their own peer identity. They want to be with their peers. And this brings me to another really interesting evolutionary change that occurs in the teenage years. And that is in their sleep patterns. So we know that, generally speaking, in humans, little ones tend to sleep, and I am generalizing, from about 7 in the evening for about, say, 12 hours. And we know that the adult brain, and I am talking about over 25 years old, is really when the brain is more or less fully developed. So over 25 years old, we tend to develop a sleep pattern that is about from, say, 10:30 or 11 at night for about maybe 7.5, maybe 8 hours, something like that, roughly, okay? But the teenage sleep pattern is different, and that is from about midnight or 1 for about 9.5 hours. They are programmed biologically to sleep at that time. We could go into a whole conversation about schools and the early starts for them, which is slightly different, but they're programmed to sleep at that time. So you will be noticing that they are sleepy when they come in the mornings and so on. It's because they're supposed to be asleep. And it's like me being made to go to work at 5 a.m. every day. Not pretty if I did that. But basically, we have an interesting shift. And this is the really interesting bit, is why? Why do we have these different sleep patterns? And we don't know for sure, but we think that it's because when we all lived together in caves millennia ago, we evolved them because all the little ones would fall asleep first, and then the older ones, the sort of adults of the group. And who was left sitting around the campfire, bonding with their peers? Well, it was the teenagers, and that's how they created their new tribe so that they could leave and be separate and independent and move off to create their new tribe. And this is part of what is happening for them. Remember, they don't know all of this. They are just living it and trying to live in a society that isn't always tolerant or supportive of these changes. So we start to understand that the teenage brain and the teenage years are very specifically different in lots of ways, all driving towards getting them to be independent. And another interesting thing is the risk taking. So we know that when teens take risks, it's a very different experience from when adults take risks. And so just to sort of give it some sense of the measure of how different it is, when a teenager takes a risk and you think, why are they doing that? Well, the answer is because it feels amazing. They're getting a huge buzz from it. All their reward centers are lighting up. So my husband came home a couple of days ago. He said, oh my God, I just nearly hit this kid on his bike. He was weaving about all over the place, fast as you like, no helmet, racing along, and raced out in front of his car. That kid was feeling amazing, completely oblivious to the danger potentially, or part of that was the excitement. So when we look at their brains under MRI and they're feeling this, it's all the reward centers lighting up. Somebody of my age, it's more like that little Christmas bulb on the tree that goes bzz. Not so much, but they get this huge buzz. The problem is the last bit of the brain to develop is the prefrontal cortex. And that's the bit that goes, should I be doing this? It's the risk assessment part. It's Mr. Health and Safety or Miss Health and Safety. The point is they don't yet have a fully developed prefrontal cortex. In fact, they may not have that fully developed until their mid-20s. And that's the bit that does all the organizational stuff. Oh, I've forgotten my sports kit. It's all the stuff that thinks about the strategic planning and risk management and impulse control. And some very clever psychologists have worked out that the age at which you get the most buzz from doing something risky and the least ability to go, ooh, maybe that's not a great idea, least handbrake, if you like, is 14.38 years. So that'll be what, year 9, 10? Yeah, good luck. I've got one of those. And it means that they are doing things that feel fantastic, that they're learning about the world through, because of course that's what risk taking is actually all about, is exploring the world they're around. And then when they come in and you go, God, what were you thinking? Like, I wasn't, because they weren't. Now, of course, they have to learn. That's not to say they don't, but they are doing things that are very much driven by their evolution and their biology. And it can be helpful, I find, to sort of understand how much of this is all about they're trying to become independent and learn about the world around them. Things that happen in the teenage years that are super important, of course, are things like developing their self-identity. So this can be kind of some of the fun stuff, can be a bit challenging, of course. And I like to think of it as a jigsaw. So their future identity, who they want to be, I don't mean what job, I mean who they want to be as people, is sort of like a jigsaw that they don't know what that image is yet. So they're trying pieces of that jigsaw, and the pieces might be green hair, piercings, tattoos. It might be really obnoxious grime music. Living with that right now. It might be some very interesting political views that they're testing out, seeing what response they get. All sorts of things are going on. They are trying to develop their self-identity. And of course, some of those bits will stick, some more than others if it's a tattoo. But basically, they are just trying that out. So we can help them by being alongside them, having some of those difficult conversations around, well, that's an interesting viewpoint. Can we just check what that actually means, and sort of trying to help shape them to become, you know, good parts of society. But they are trying this stuff out, and it isn't necessarily permanently who they're going to be, of course. They're also at a really, you know, challenging stage for working through social groups, which we'll come to in a minute. And it is such an important time to help them to find people they can trust to talk to, because, of course, they are starting to find their family embarrassing, which is uncomfortable. And of course, they still potentially, hopefully, love their family, but it's that really awkward, like, well, I don't necessarily want to talk to my mum or dad. So it's about trying to help them to find people they trust to talk to. And you could be those people, absolutely. It can also be people like if they've got an older sibling, grown-up siblings. It could be auntie, uncle type of person. It could be often it's quite a good combination if they think about like who their best friend's mum or dad is, that sort of, you know, connection, that's more comfortable for them. But trying to encourage them to have those safe places to go, a safe harbour, is a really important thing to be doing at this time. Now, the friendship group stuff and relationships are really interesting because they change through the teenage years. So we know that younger sort of tween teens have much more chaotic friendships than as they get older into the 15, 16, 17-year-old age groups where they stabilize. And think of it almost like when they're 13, 14, they're sort of like in a pinball machine. They're pinging off lots of different groups. They're trying to find their people, their tribe. It all goes back to this basic evolutionary drive to find the people that they will form their tribe with in future. Now, we know they'll meet more friends and more people hopefully in life, but they're starting that process now. And so as they get through the older teen years, yeah, there's a little bit less chaotic, it's more stable. They've started to find those people who have maybe shared interests, shared values, and so on. So it can be quite chaotic, but that's why. And what we need to help them to understand is what makes for a healthy relationship. What is a positive relationship? Because we can't just pick individuals and say, well, that's a good person, that's not a good person. It's much more important that they learn the sort of skill for life of how to identify what's a healthy interaction, what's not a healthy interaction. What's the difference between, you know, the bullying and coercive type of friendships, which can end badly, whether it's at school, university, or later in life, and the healthy, positive ones that boost you up and make you feel good about yourself. I've written there some of the, obviously you all know this, but the kind of key, I guess, descriptors of a healthy relationship, what you want to be helping them to understand. And again, you can only be alongside them as they navigate this. You can't do it for them. So it's about helping them to say, well, recognize, you know, do you think your friend, are they prepared to compromise? Are they, you know, respectful of your views or of you? And get them to start learning to think about those, because once they're off in the workplace at university, this stuff is still relevant and they're going to need to think to themselves, well, I thought that person was my friend, but actually they always put me down, or they never listen to what I've got to say, and so on. So it's really important skills that at the moment they know what makes for a healthy relationship. And that does take us into also those romantic relationships. We are living in a world that is kind of, I say post Me Too, I mean, it's Me Too plus, and there are some really, you know, extreme reactions coming out at both ends of that spectrum. And it is a really difficult place for young people to negotiate, because they naturally, and this is another bit about the teenage brain, they naturally have black and white thinking. Black and white thinking is a stage of the brain development that becomes more able to deal with the subtleties of greys and maybes in its mid-20s. But actually, in the teens and even early 20s, black and white, you're right, you're wrong, I'm right, you're wrong, and so on. And it means that those conversations where you're trying to get them to see the other side of it and consider the fact that maybe there's more to this that we don't know, very hard to do when there's black and white thinking. Just as an aside, I work with universities to look at some serious incidents, and sometimes behind those serious incidents, when they get me to come in as a sort of external reviewer, is some very significant black and white thinking, people in very entrenched places that have led to some very difficult behaviours. It doesn't just stop because they leave school. So we really need to help them to understand about two sides to a story, you know, not being so quick to judge, but also how to have difficult conversations, how to manage conflict, how to compromise, how to listen, how to pick your moment. Because it might be just something reasonably straightforward, like your flatmates are always leaving all the washing up in the kitchen's a state. How are you going to have that conversation with them? Or it might be something much more serious to do with potential, you know, sexual misconduct and stuff. So they really, really need to understand the principles. And so hopefully, having given you some of that context, it starts to become more clear why they have these extremes of like, you're not my friend anymore, I don't want to talk to you anymore. And as I said, that can go on into their 20s, quite extreme reactions, because they're still going through the black and white thinking, good, bad, extreme points of view, and they're going through all this kind of chaotic trying to find their tribe. It is always, always about becoming independent and trying to find their people that they're going to be with. And that's what's going on. So it's really interesting when we start to understand what's behind that. Okay, So hopefully I've given you a bit of an overview of some of the key things that are happening for teens and in the teenage brain. We're going to talk briefly about into mental health now, and I'm going to focus a little bit on eating disorders and self-harm. So the first thing to say, and I always try and frame it this way, if you're talking to young people about mental health, it's so important that they are understanding what we mean by good mental health. We do not mean being happy all the time. It's not possible. It's boring. So it is about feeling and functioning well, being able to do the things we want to do when we want to do them. And sometimes, you know, we need a bit of help. We have good days and bad days, good hours and bad hours, ups and downs. And so it's really important that they understand that it's okay, obviously, to ask for support, but that's normal as well. And just to give you the background figures, if you're going to develop a mental health problem in your life at all, it is most likely to happen before the age of 24. Okay, so 3/4 of mental health problems arise before then. In fact, 50% before the age of 14, but that includes all of the genetic stuff, the stuff that you're born with, obviously. So the other stuff develops in your teens. And I guess it makes sense. We've just been talking about how the teenage brain is developing, well, the brain rather is developing, the human brain, from before you're born all the way through till your mid-20s. Well, if something's going to go wrong, it is most likely to go wrong when you're building it. So it's impacted by genetics and family background and issues at school and work pressures and relationship issues. So it makes sense. So what we need to do is help young people to manage the ups and downs in life. Because I mean, it's a silly saying, but I sort of say to them, you know, life is wiggly. It's unpredictable. We don't know where it's going to go. And I guess they've seen that now with COVID. So we have to have those life skills so that we can carry on and manage those ups and downs. So first to focus on is building their independence. Their drive is towards independence, but unfortunately, and especially this was before the pandemic as well, but before the pandemic, we were already struggling with perhaps a slightly less independent generation, perhaps. Definitely getting them to stay at home for 2 years has not helped. And it has also massively disrupted their social interactions and social skills learning. So they had 2 years, which would have been crucial for learning to, you know, get out and about and meet people and new skills. And they have had that disrupted, really disrupted. So you'll be seeing that play out in that often they are now having more immature interactions than you would have expected for their age group. And again, that is happening in university settings as well. So I've put up there a list of things that I consider to be reasonable things to try and get them to aim to be able to do by the time they leave school. And some of them will seem obvious. Some of them you might say, oh, I don't know if that's possible. I've put them up there, a couple of examples I might give you. Well, going to interviews, and I've put alone, and I do mean with your mates is okay, but potentially not with your family, not with your carers. And some people say, oh, that's quite interesting, because now everybody, you know, it's like a family day out. Let's go and look at an open day. Let's go to the interviews together. Problem is, they need to learn to go to these things on their own, and they also need to make those decisions themselves. And if you think back to, I don't know, 20 years ago, did not go to these things.
Thank you very much. We'll continue after this session.
Mums and dads sitting in the waiting room. It's going to the next level. And we have to get them to think about how they're going to do this. So what I tend to say to parents is, if you go to the day and the interview days, mainly, I say step back, let them lead. Let them, you know, which university, which course, which campus, which combination, because it's their life. And some of the most difficult consultations was with a young person sitting in front of me saying, I hate it here. I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this course. I don't want to live where I'm living. I'm here because my family want me to do this. And that is a massive pressure on them that they really don't need. So I guess I'm just pleading with you, if you hear that sort of thing going on there, any way you can encourage them, the ones who lead on those decision makings would be great. I've put a couple of other things in there, like learn to cook, because some of my favourite stories from universities come from the accommodation. And I get told about, well, the young man who every single year there's a young man who puts an entire tin of baked beans in my in the kitchen every single year. And the young lady, this did happen, who put she put her jumper in the oven to warm it up before she put it on, and she burnt the house down. Nobody was injured. But these are the sorts of things when they are not independence and skills, ability to look after and thrive in the wilderness without anything else. So it is really important that we try and encourage them to do some things. The rest, I think, are fairly if you do want some free resources, these two PDFs are consulting because a lot of schools like to do to just get ready for that last bit as they leave, when they're heading off to uni, and what do they need to do? So I just did two top 10 things about what you can do as the parent or carer and what they need to do to prepare, to go. And as I said, feel free to sort of give them out. I mean, on the parent one, I have specifically said, if you are dropping them off at uni, drop them and then go away. Leave them alone, because we now have stories of, well, first providers for the parents to stay in during Precious Week. That's going to yes, they're staying Precious Week, and the kids do not like it. And that's
This one is better.
so. I mean, anything we can do to try
Sorry.
independence. And then the other bit, so the other side of sort of big picture I always build is build independence, live independently, also be able to do stuff. So I picked out, the key thing, really show all the studies, build your network, those out there need other humans. It's the number one thing that people need to keep them well in life. So they need to gradually build their skills, their social connections, but we've seen this generation get disrupted for 2 years. They're not as good at it as they should be. And it is something that I've actually, one of my blogs is about, I write lots of free blogs on a different website called growingaggrownup.com. Feel free to have a look. And one of them is about making friends. It's not as easy as it used to be. And just some ideas and thoughts about how we get them to talk to each other and build those skills, because they're arriving at universities, and obviously I keep going back to university, but it'll be similar in the workplace, and then they don't talk to anyone. They just go in their room. It's safe in there. They've been told for 2 years, stay indoors, so they did. And now they don't talk to people. They don't know how to talk to each other. And one of the biggest issues at university right now, cost of living, yes, loneliness. It's the other thing that everyone is talking about. How do we get them to connect with others? So anything you can do to help them build those skills, talk to each other, learn how to talk to people they're not so comfortable with, is brilliant. I talk about purpose because this is something that the younger generation get very focused on, is I need to have a purpose. I need to know what my purpose is in life. Or they come and sit in front of me and say, I don't know what my purpose is in life. And therefore, and this is the sad bit, there is no purpose to my life. And they would get very, very down about that. They were 18, 19 years old. So obviously we'd have a conversation, quite an existential one, about the fact that actually you don't need to know what your purpose is in life. You might have one purpose, you might have multiple purposes. You might have no specific purpose until you're 60. I mean, who knows? It's such a sort of vague concept for us, but actually they believe they need to know. I don't know where that comes from, but it's probably not helped by a culture of constantly asking them, what do you want to be when you grow up? What are you going to do when you grow up? And I'm sorry, I know you're a career advisor, but I'm just saying we need to reframe it slightly, potentially, and you can think about this to what kind of person do you want to be? What are you interested in? And I know you'll be doing that, but what's happening is they believe they should know. And if they don't know, they believe there is no point to their life. And I kid you not, this is a really important thing that comes up again and again. So I talk about daily purpose. I think about what made you feel good today? What did you achieve today? It doesn't have to be every day, but what is your sort of daily purpose? Did you play a game of football? Did you bake a cake for your family? Did you write a card to your granny? What made you feel good? It can be academic, of course, but I'm just saying it's about taking the focus off that life purpose. And then there's all the stuff around fear of failure, fear of letting people down, talking to them about the fact that it is normal as we explore life to make mistakes. We know that, and they know it in theory, but they are terrified. And any of you have heard me speak before about competitiveness and perfectionism know that it's one of the biggest fears of this generation is fear of failure. And that's what my TEDx, the 78,000 consultations one, is about. So that's just 10 minutes on that topic if you're interested. And then the taking good risks. Okay, so we know they love taking exciting risks, but actually taking the good risks, meeting new people, going to new places, trying a new activity. And if they're really nervous and anxious, just try a new food or something like that. You know, just some sort of small thing that makes them feel good about themselves. Trying new stuff builds self-esteem. So kind of a couple of slides on each of eating disorders and eating issues and self-harm. And the first thing I want to say is that really, when we talk about eating issues, one of the most important things to remember is that they're not about food. They are about needing to feel secure and in control. The rules and everything else will be around food and body image and those sorts of beliefs. But if we're going to address them, we have to address whatever it is they don't feel is in their control. So we have to think about what else is going on for them. And this is the same with self-harm. It's the why that matters, what is underneath them. And often with eating issues, body images, issues and so on, if we don't ask, we're not going to know about it. People are not necessarily going to share this with you. So it's worth asking about and gently inquiring and thinking about, well, what's going on? And in a school environment, I've just put out there, how might that manifest? How might you notice it? Is it the person who doesn't come to lunch anymore? Or is it the person who wears really baggy clothes and is drinking and sipping from water bottles or Diet Coke all the time? I say that carefully because I drink Diet Coke, but it's about the need to feel full all the time so that you don't then feel hungry. So there are lots of things that might manifest that are not your classic, you know, yes, you might know that they're being sick in the toilets after a meal, but actually there's other stuff going on. And recently a school contacted me because they've noticed a huge group of the girls is just not coming to lunch anymore. Now, it's not mandatory. You can't make them go to lunch, but they don't know what to do about it. And they don't know what's going on and why. And it's some of the people that they really wouldn't have thought. So it starts with one and then others don't go, but well, because they're not going. So lots of them are missing meals, but actually they might not do that otherwise. They're doing it because their friends are not going, so they don't want to be the odd one out. So there's a really complex thing playing out there. So it's just about being alert to that and then thinking about, well, why? What's the underlying reason? I'm going to talk about how we ask about it, but I've just put up this image because this is from a young lady who did come and see me about her eating issues, but she came in and she said, I don't know how to tell you about what I want to talk about. So here, and she handed me this piece of paper. Now, you can't see it, but in that black cloud is the word food, but it's everything that comes from that. All of those thoughts and questions. Again, we don't need to almost read them all up beyond, you know, should I binge, should I not, what will my friends think of me and so on. I just feel exhausted looking at it for her. You know, I feel that's all going on in her brain all the time, as well as studying, sports, friendships, flatmates, maybe being the treasurer of the Frisbee club. All of that stuff is going on. And this, it's exhausting. And so my message around any of these issues is always start with compassion, because they are really carrying a lot. They're struggling with a lot. If you want to ask about it, there are questions you can ask. Don't have to, obviously, but if you want to, you can carefully ask about, you know, do they worry about their weight or their figure at all? Does it affect how they feel? If you just want to suss out whether there's a problem with that or anything else, just fine to ask, because, you know, we can only hope that they'll trust us and speak to us about it, and they may not. But actually, if they just go, oh, no, I'm fine, it's just other stuff going on, then you probably are okay. If they look all like frightened about it and worried and anxious and kind of won't talk about it, then there probably is an issue. But it's about, you know, trying to sensitively and compassionately explore what's going on for them and come back to the why, because unless you deal with the why, you're never going to sort out the problem, the way it's manifesting. If you are interested, we are seeing many more eating issues in boys and men. And that's manifesting in a slightly different way. So if you're interested in this topic, I was part of the Food Matters Live podcast that did an episode on that. So you can just have a listen to eating disorders in men and boys. But we see it in a different group. It's often those who are extremely sporty, competitive, athletic. especially anywhere where weight is an issue. So gymnastics, ballet, I mean, horse riding and jockeys, that sort of thing, but anywhere where weight can be an issue in that way. If they have a coach who is very negative about their image and how they are. I certainly know at schools that have gyms, we've got loads of teachers telling me that they're going to the gym very young now. We've got 12-year-olds going and trying to do weights. Well, they've got twiglet arms and they can barely lift anything, and they're sort of trying to see if they've got a muscle when they haven't even been through their puberty and growth spurt. They don't have the muscles they need to, but everybody's talking about their muscles. And there are other issues like academic pressure or family difficulties or abuse that can also be in the background for boys. And the way it presents, as I said, is around sort of being muscly, wanting to be muscly, or being very muscly, but seeing themselves as too thin, which is called muscle dysmorphia. So that's one sort of thing that we see. But we also see a very disordered type of eating. It becomes all about the protein. And that may be just protein foods initially, and then it becomes the protein shakes and the supplements and the blending food, and it kind of goes into that more extreme beliefs. And so again, they'll be the ones that you see in the dining hall, but whose plate is just the meat, the proteins, maybe the salads and veg, maybe if you're lucky if a teenage boy touches it, but basically it's all about the protein, and they become really obsessive about it. And so it often is alongside compulsive exercise. So there's some different behaviours from females, but we are definitely seeing more of these, and they are really important to think about. And of course, they are often quite hidden. So with all of these things, there are great resources out there for them. And again, in my various blogs that I write on all these different topics. And in every blog, I put resources like where to go next, what to look at, which charities and so on, if you're interested. With self-harm, it's a difficult topic. But again, the thing to remember is to understand why it's happening. Unless we deal with the why, we are never going to get rid of the self-harm. We can help them to find an alternative and a safer way to release their pain instead of physically, but we have to understand the why of it. And that's actually what my other TEDx talk is called. It's Understanding Why, and it's specifically about self-harm. I think what I focus on is in that talk is explaining that with self-harm, because for a lot of people it's like, but why would you do that to yourself? And it's such an unpleasant thing to do. They are replacing emotional pain and distracting them from themselves from it with physical pain in most cases. And that idea is that imagine a boiling pot, okay? Boiling, and there's a lid on it. The self-harm is like if you take the lid off, it releases the pressure. It releases some of that stress. The problem is, if we think that the answer is to say to them, just stop doing it, please don't do it, it upsets me, it's going to upset your family, whatever, they will try to help you if they can and oblige, because they want to please people, to put the pot lid back on. And then you can imagine the consequences. The pressure just builds again. And then it can go really badly wrong when they don't have an outlet. So we need to help them with the reason that it's happening, the why, and to find alternative healthy outlets. And there are lots of resources out there for that. One of the best is the Distract app. It won the BMA Patient Award. It's free and created by colleagues and myself. It is for young people. It is suitable for them and anyone who works with them. But it is really important that if they're the sort of person who is doing things that are harmful, if it's for the positive sort of feeling I need to feel alive, then look for alternatives, like for a positive buzz. There are many alternatives out there. Some seem more relevant than others, but it is just about finding them a positive outlet for that. But if it's more about just taking away the pain, then we need to think about the pain itself and a healthy alternative. I've just put this in there because I thought it was really interesting. The latest studies that have just come out, the blue line is university students, undergrads, and the other is their peers who are the same age match peers. And it's really interesting to see, if you look at the year, so the blue one at the top that is when self-harm happens most in students. You can see that it's related to academic pressure points. It'll be the same in school kids, probably. And their age-matched peers who are not at university, it tends to be at different times of year. So you can see that the pressure of academic life can put an extra pressure on students. And then we can see what's been happening over the last few years in terms of it is increasing. And post-pandemic, we have seen a massive increase in all young people eating issues and self-harm, which is why I picked those specifically, as well as anxiety. So just to kind of finish up with the last few slides about what we do, because it can all feel very overwhelming, we need to remember that the biggest pressures for this generation tend to be around fear of failure, fear of letting people down, and that lack of purpose. That's why I said it is so important. From those, we often see some of the most dramatic or negative actions, by which I mean both self-harm and into suicidal behaviours. So we need to get ahead of those if we can. We need to think about how we deal with it. And this is the bit that for me is really important to understand, that there can be a disconnect in the support we think they may have and what they actually view it as. So that young person would come and sit in front of me and say, I don't know what to do. I feel absolutely rock bottom. I don't know where to go with this, to the point of suicidal. And I'd say, okay, that sounds really, really difficult. Can you tell me a bit about, have you talked to anyone about this? Have you spoken to your family, anyone at all? And they'd say, no, not talking to anyone. I'm not talking to my family, certainly. And I say, okay, that sounds really difficult. Is it because, then don't really get mental health, or they're not really supportive? And they'd say, no, they're lovely. Actually, no, I've got lots of people who'd support me, but I don't want to let them down. I don't want to worry them. So we have this mismatch where we have really struggling young people who won't tell their families. And I'm talking obviously once they're over 18, it's much harder than when they're younger, perhaps, to just go straight into safeguarding mode. We have to think about confidentiality and so on. So one of the things that I kept thinking was, what if we could in any way get ahead of this? How do we get ahead of this? How do we talk to them and let them know that, and this is kind of the key message really, that we tell them that they can tell us anything, that nothing is off the table. We are here to help them, to listen, to try and support them. And that, we're not promising confidentiality or anything like that. We want them to know that someone is there to listen. And my key message here is, no matter what that issue is, because we always think, they think, oh, you mean like if I get stressed about my exams or like a relationship issue? I'm talking about anything, because young people get accused of stuff that comes out of left field. They get accused of plagiarism, cheating. They get accused of, these days, using AI for their essays. They get accused of sexual assault and things like that they have no idea what to do with that. And they will not talk to people about it because they feel such shame. Even if it didn't happen, it's not true, and so on. Whether it did or not, they need to talk to someone. So my message here is to make it clear to them that stuff happens in life. Whether it's true or not, you're going to need support. And therefore, we can try and help them by saying this ahead of the time to get ahead of that curve, so that they know that we're there for them. And when they do speak to us, and we feel a bit like, oh, that is quite a bit of a difficult situation, just remember, at this point, we're not trying to fix everything. We really just want them to know that we're listening. We're hearing what they're telling us. We're hearing their version, even if we're thinking, is that what happened? I'm not really sure that's what happened. We're thinking, okay, we are here to listen and believe them. Again, it's about them feeling validated and heard. It is so important to build that trust, because if they don't think you're listening or believing them, they may never talk to anyone again, not just you. They may never talk to anyone about this again. And then finally, they need that hope. They need to know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Because of that black and white thinking, they go from everything's okay to definitely not okay very quickly, very impulsively. The impulsiveness is potentially dangerous because of that age of the brain. They haven't got the ability to necessarily stop themselves. So it is so important to listen, believe them, and give them that hope that says, God, this sounds really difficult for you. I'm so sorry, but I think it can be better than this. Let's see what we can work out. Let's see where we can go. Let's see what we can do. As I said, I've got loads and loads of blogs on all these different topics, all freely available, and they cover everything from, you know, the eating disorders and anxiety and sleep issues through to how to talk to them, through to why they feel things so exceptionally passionately. Who can get that excited about a cheese sandwich? But they do. Everything is really passionate. All of that is explained, but also that you've got help out there. There are resources out there so that you don't feel alone in trying to sort these things out. My favorite resources I've popped up here. If you just wanted one amazing website, Young Minds, you'll probably all know about Young Minds, but there are other great resources. One of my favorites is the Aardman animation one that we created. I did not obviously create the Aardman, they created the Aardman animations. I came up with the themes and we worked with young people to create the website. So 5 brilliant, short, 45 to 50-second brand new animations from Aardman about these sorts of topics. So well worth a look if you haven't seen it. Okay, so I'll stop there. I'm happy to answer questions. And obviously, if you've got any thoughts around any of this, to hear those, all my resources that I've mentioned. And in fact, I'll just pop these little flyers if it's helpful, just because sometimes people want to take home about the websites, the growingaggrownup.com website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for attending. I am conscious I think there is a follow-up lecture, which is apologies why I think some of the students have been sneaking in, even though they should be waiting. So if it's all right with you, if we do any questions,
yes.
Okay, into the foyer area.
Yes.
Please come and speak to Dominique, and ask any questions that you've got.
Yes.
You might find that exit is particularly busy with students. So if you want a slightly quieter exit, you might be better coming out this way and you'll walk round and go into the foyer for the business exhibition shortly. So thank you very much. I'm sorry
no worries.
I have to wrap up.
Thank you. Shall we just mute that one and